Hey, Ashling. Cool. Okay, so I'm gonna get cracking. I feel that I'm just gonna keep apologizing for the fact that it's not a more interesting subject, but there we go. Let me just share my screen. Everyone see it all right? Perfect. So I was going to go through like a full sort of proper thing about project management and go through like Prince 2 and like Microsoft Project and agile working and all of that stuff. But I was then like, what is the point? Because essentially none of that is required for the project management that relates into what you guys would be doing as the youth committee. So instead I've just sort of gone through and broken down my role as I've seen it here at the trust and how theoretically it would then be kind of transferred over to you guys if as part of the youth committee. There's obviously a couple of differences, so like I've kind of gone through what I do, and then at the end we'll chat through the youth committee and like the differences between how it's organized now and how it could be organized in the future. Nothing's still set in stone about it, so it's very much sort of like we can have a conversation, have a bit of chat and feedback as to how exactly it's going to work. So yeah, instead of going through like all of the kind of technical side of things and like how you're supposed to do everything, I've just gone through the actual logistics of it. And I've put photos that have nothing to do with project management, but everything to do with what we've been doing, because believe me, the photos that when Google imaging of project management is dull. So I've split it down into planning, budgeting, organization, communication, delivery, feedback, analysis and evaluation, and reporting. And I'll just kind of run through a bit on each. I think I may be talking for about like half an hour or so, and then we can maybe have a break or maybe just go straight into the youth committee stuff. We'll see how it goes. So in terms of planning, this is where it's kind of going to be a bit different for you guys as it was for me, because the planning stage of this project has essentially been done by someone else when they applied for the grant. So they'd already decided what the outcomes that they wanted were and how they were going to achieve what they wanted. Whereas you guys have a bit more control in what you want to plan out of the youth committee and what you want to get out of it. So this process will be a bit more personal to you than it has been with the project that we're on now. And I think when it comes to looking at your outcomes and what you want to achieve, you also need to consider how you're going to measure these outcomes, and whether that's like you're going to be getting quantitative data on it or qualitative data, but exactly what you're going to be able to say, yes, we did this and it has achieved this outcome. A good example of it that's a badly defined outcome is that as part of my remit, one of the outcomes is supposed to be that we want to inspire you, but we want you to inspire other people. How do we measure whether you're inspiring other people? Like, without being really personal and like, you know, asking you for like how many things you're getting on Instagram or on your blogs or anything like that. It's a really difficult metric to measure. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're looking at outcomes. But once you have your plan of what you're hoping to achieve, we're then starting to look at creating a full project plan for it. And in terms of this, I'm not talking about like on this date we'll have this webinar, or on this date we'll have this webinar. It's more looking at the overall project and what kind of targets you want to hit, whether you want to have X number of volunteers by this date, or you want to have successfully completed a campaign at this date, that kind of stuff, rather than the nitty-gritty of like training and events. So creating a timeline with some key dates and tasks is really easy to do in Excel. Let's see. I was going to share, I'll share it at the end actually, I think. But you can create charts that are very easy to see at which point you should be doing what and at what time a action should start, the delivery phase of that action, and then at what time that action should be completed. And then with that comes the project plan, where you kind of put all of this together and say, on this date this happens, this is the action, this is who it's for, the audience. So whether that is you're working with the marketing team to do some social media posts, whether you're working with the reserves team to go and be at a reserve, whether you're recruiting volunteers, all of that kind of needs to be put down there, and the person who's going to be responsible for this. So in my project plan, I'm the person responsible for everything, but in the committee, obviously things will be divided up a little bit. So it's just important to kind of keep a track of who's doing what, and then finally what you are measuring as an outcome of success for that particular action. And that kind of allows you to see where the project is going. And it doesn't matter whether things like some things can be done earlier, some things can be done later. The point of the project plan is to kind of keep an overall eye on how well it's going. Like when I used to work in events, obviously, like project plans had a very specific end because the event happened. So if something hadn't have been done by then, you were in trouble. Whereas with what you guys are doing, there isn't quite that same deadline. So things can be kind of shifted and be like, okay, well, we missed this target, but we've done better here. But it's really useful for kind of keeping everything there. So the planning phase, I think, in terms of the youth committee, will probably take quite a while, because it's really like, it's probably one of the more important things, and it really needs to be got right at the beginning for a project to be a success. I think I've waffled long enough about that. And along with the planning comes the budgeting. So these two will probably often be done quite simultaneously. My budget is set by the National Lottery Heritage Fund, who are the grant provider. The youth committee budget will be set by Warwickshire Wildlife Trust. I am still in conversations as to how much that will be, but there is budget for it because I've been promised it. So I don't know how much experience anyone's got with budgeting. Some of you have probably got a fair bit, others of you might not have any at all. But for the sake of ease, let's say that the youth committee are given 10 grand a year to do what they want with. The first thing you'll need to do is forecast it and categorize it. And so that will be, when are you spending the money and what are you spending it on? So it's making sure that you're considering travel, events, expenses, overheads, training and marketing. That's the main proportion of where budget will be going. To give you an idea of the current budget, if you take salaries out of it, the vast majority of the budget goes on the training, which is the webinars and the in-person events. Oh, hang on, I think there's more people in the waiting room. How do I do this now? So that'll be where the vast majority of the money's going. But you need to kind of keep aware of the travel costs for volunteers, expenses. The overheads will be dictated by Warwickshire Wildlife Trust, and that just includes, it's basically, it'll probably be Carl or whoever, probably like a day of their salaried costs every month to make sure that everything's going all right. Marketing would be sort of like if you want to push any social media posts or do anything like that, that would come out of the marketing budget. And so really, to be honest, at the beginning of a project, like it is a bit of guesswork, and it'll be based a little bit on how many events and webinars you guys decide to be putting on. I mean, at the moment, we're going for what sort of like 4 webinars and maybe 2 in-person events each month. I don't imagine that that's going to be exactly the same as what the youth committee does. I think it will probably be a little bit scaled back. So it's just a bit of guesswork, to be honest. You'll have like information from me on what I've been paying for webinars and in-person stuff. So that will be kind of your guide. But honestly, some months you won't hit your budget at all, and some months you'll overspend. Like so many people do the webinars for free, which is lovely. And then some of the in-person events and some of the webinars have been really expensive, so it sort of skews everything. But it's just important to kind of keep an eye on things and make sure that you're not going to have a big underspend or a big overspend towards the end of the year. I mean, these things do happen, but ultimately underspends are worse, because if you don't spend the money, you won't get the money next year. So it is important to make sure that it is like all spent as much as possible, I'd say. And whoever kind of ends up managing the budget and the person at Warwickshire Wildlife Trust will work with you to put the budget together and put it in the format that is required for the trust. And then as invoices and things come in, it will kind of be updated, but it will essentially be in the control of you guys, I think. And to be honest, like budgeting, once you get used to it, is quite easy. It's just can be intimidating when you first start it. So once you kind of got your plan, you've got your budget, then you can start sort of like the actual organizing of things. So say for the sake of things, you've tried that you'd like to do 2 webinars and 1 in-person event each month. It's then going and deciding as a group who you want, what topics you want, and going out and doing a bunch of research about what the providers are, who the local people are. There's obviously like the great thing with the webinars is that you can get people from all over the country, and like distance isn't an issue at all. Whereas when it comes to the in-person ones, we obviously want to try to get local people, not just for cost sake, but also because they have local knowledge, which is really helpful when it comes to wandering around woodlands and things like that and finding fungi and whatnot. If people weren't from around, they'd probably struggle for it a bit. But it can be quite time consuming. And I'm also conscious that we have now at this point covered a lot of topics. So I think we're on like 50 webinars at least, and maybe like 12, 13 in-person events. Obviously there's plenty more out there, but there is also at some point going to be some recycling of what we've already done. And that's important too, because hopefully new people will be joining the project all the time. And I know that there's people that have joined since I've started that have been asking for things that have already happened. And I'm having to say, oh, we've actually already done that one. So maybe sort of thinking about how to recycle things that are still, that would still be relevant for people that have seen them before. But this can take a lot of chasing, a lot of emails, a lot of phone calls. to reach the right people, to kind of get responses, and ultimately, like, it's not always someone's highest priority what we're asking them to do, particularly with particularly sometimes when they're offering to do it for free, but like it's not their sort of day job. It might take a while to get things set up, but once you've kind of got an idea of who you'd like to reach out to and you're having some good conversations, you can then start scheduling some dates. I've been using that Team Up calendar, which I found really, really helpful, because the way that I've been doing this is that I'm not constantly reaching out to people. I do it every sort of like 2 months or so, and then go out to a bunch of people all at once. But it means that like dates are often like quite TBC for a while, and I might have given a couple of different providers the same dates and then sort of have to tweak things. But Team Up's been great for that, because I can see what I've got in, what's confirmed, what's still like outstanding. Obviously, if it's an in-person event, there's locations to consider as well. I know that a lot of the stuff that we've been doing have been centered around Brandon and kind of Brighton, Bumenhall, that sort of area, but that can be changed. It's just because it's, I guess, like fairly central to the county, but you know, there's nothing to stop you guys being like, okay, well, one of our objectives is that we're going to have an in-person event at every Warwickshire Wildlife Trust site, and just tick them off over the next couple of years. Like that can be something that the youth committee can do. But yeah, like location is important, and if the provider is someone from Warwickshire Wildlife Trust, they'll obviously know the best site to do it at anyway. If they're not from Warwickshire Wildlife Trust, they might already know the sites really well, but there'll always be someone at the trust that you can go and ask. Carl's probably the best shout because he's the director of reserves. But I mean, it's difficult to say, but like consider sort of access and like how far it is for people, and if there is any public transport, which obviously it's kind of, the reserves aren't particularly well served by it. But one thing that came out of our staff business meetings before Christmas is that we're going to start petitioning Coventry to get to put Brandon Marsh on the bus route, so which would be excellent, because I don't know why it's not on there. I mean, it's a fairly obvious place to have a bus going, I'd say. So dates, locations, have a bit of a chat about content for what the session's going to be. Sometimes I give bullet points as to like what I think I'd like it to cover. Other times, like the person leads and says like, well, this is what we do, this is what we talk about. So it's just a bit of a mixture. I think it's sometimes difficult to know exactly how engaging someone's going to be, particularly with the webinars. And some webinars, like I know retrospectively have like come in at too high a level and are like slightly too detailed. Others of them have been like maybe a bit too brief, like, but I think with those, like it's really hard to know exactly how it's going to be until the night, essentially. But giving a bit more of what you're looking for would probably definitely help with the webinars. I think the in-person stuff, it really has to be led by whoever the person is or whoever the expert is that you've got coming in. During all of this, you'll agree a fee for it. And like I said, the fees can massively vary. Like I'd say webinars about £100 is what we're usually looking at. On the day, in-person stuff more around 300. And then obviously like there's the exceptions, there's like the field trips and things like that are more expensive. And there's also the communications and campaigning side of things, which are much more expensive. And I think that can be a separate discussion potentially as to whether we want to keep including that in the project or not. We can chat about that later. So once you've got everything organized, you've got all the details, you can then create the registration form on Eventbrite, which is very simple to do, and there'll be some step-by-step instructions as to how to do it. And that is basically the pre-organisation of it. I think in terms of the like in-person ones, they probably do need a bit more planning than the webinar ones, obviously, and also planning more in advance. I know how busy everyone gets, and like hopefully COVID won't stop in-person events again for a while, but you know, everyone has plans sometimes like 2-3 months in advance, occasionally on weekends. So the more notice you can give people with those, the better. Whereas with the webinars, you know, a couple of weeks is fine. And especially if they're going to be able to be recorded, then that's not an issue at all. Sometimes people are fine with the recording, sometimes not. It's just up to the person. And then if it is recorded, some of them are happy for it to be on the public YouTube, whereas others of them would prefer it to be like not listed, so that only people with the link have got it. But it's something that's worth checking with someone when you're having the initial conversations. So once it's all set up, it needs to be communicated and publicised. So this bit will be possibly a bit different. The webinars are either public or private, depending on what the speaker has requested. And I think generally speaking, most of the ecological environmental ones are happy for it to be public, whereas the campaigning ones would prefer it to be private. I mean, obviously we've sort of fallen into our weekly emails, which is how I tell you guys about the events. And then additionally, I do a couple of social media posts and I update the website. I'm not great at social media, so there's probably better ways to do things than what I'm doing right now, which is just making something on Canva and then posting it. There could probably be more engagement. There's probably more ways of posting them if we want to do a public one. If there's one that you think is particularly important, there's like budget to boost it, and there's probably other avenues that we could explore in terms of publicising them. I think I'm not sure what Debbie was doing with you guys in terms of how she was telling everyone about the webinars, but I think that the weekly email works kind of well. It's just useful to have all of the information in one place rather than sending multiple emails being like, oh, this one's ready now and then this one's ready now. They're not always the most engaging, but like they give the information, which is really what's needed. I guess when it comes to, there's a bit of a difference between publicising it externally and internally within yourselves, because you shouldn't necessarily have to be selling it that much internally. People should want to be doing it, whereas the public ones you might want to like put a bit more spin and make it seem, I mean, they're all fascinating, obviously, but you know, jazz it up a little bit. And yeah, put limits on it. Obviously the in-person events do have specific limits. I think the ones that, even though initially it was limited because of COVID, I don't think that you'd want that many more people on some of the in-person events than we've had this year, just because of like what we've been doing and the ability to hear the speaker. But it's different for different ones, so I think that's something that just sort of a little bit needs to be gauged event by event. But once we've got people signed up, then you just need to communicate the specifics of the event to them. Obviously, with the webinars, that is incredibly simple, of just making sure they have the link and they know what time to log on. And then with the in-person events, obviously I've been sending the important email a week before, and that mostly works. So I think that's probably the best way to do things. Whether you want to put things on the WhatsApp group or the Facebook group is kind of up to you. But I think that most people kind of check their emails to find out about that kind of stuff. So yeah, making sure that your event is out there in the public and that people know all the details of it so that they turn up, pretty key. And then there's the delivery of the event itself. Obviously the webinars, very straightforward. Just a case of making sure that the Zoom links are set up and that you're recording it and that people are there. Whereas with the in-person ones, there's obviously there's some more elements to consider. I need to have a chat with Carl about how these are going to work exactly. Because so each of our Warwickshire Wildlife Trust sites has got a risk assessment, which I have access to, which I'll have looked at before we go to a site. There's also always someone who has a first aid qualification. So all of us at Warwickshire Wildlife Trust are first aid qualified. And if on the odd occasion there hasn't been someone there, that person, the speaker or the leader of the group, is first aid qualified. So I need to figure out whether someone, depending on how we do this, someone from the youth committee needs a first aid qualification. The risk assessments cover everything at the site, from sort of like access point, facilities, trees falling on people, all of that kind of stuff, which is something that the youth committee would need to look at. The actual physical activities that you do at the site, so whether that is coppicing or finding fungi or building leaky barriers, they are the risk assessment of the person who's leading it. That's not something that anyone in the youth committee would need to be concerned about or worry themselves with the risk assessment for, because that's the role of whoever's leading it. So there's just these sort of things to bear in mind when we get to the delivery phase. Obviously, there's also COVID, and that has changed the things that we've done over the last year, 2 years. And whether that is if social distancing is in place or whether we're not allowed inside or not allowed outside, all of it just sort of needs to be like bared in mind for what activities that we're doing. I mean, mostly we've all been outside. There's been very few of the sessions that have actually taken place indoors, and fingers crossed that outside stuff shouldn't really be an issue for much longer, but social distancing could come back at any point. Having said all of that, like, people obviously car share and everything to get to the sites, and like, so there is this bit of I guess discrepancy between what we're saying sometimes and what actually happens, but it is what it is. And then, like, at every webinar and at every in-person event, always recording the attendance, so you know who should be there, just check in that who's actually there, and yeah, just kind of keeping note of it, and then keeping an awareness of the safeguarding and well-being of the volunteers. Again, I need to have a chat with Carl as to where this is going to fall in. If the session is being led by a Warwickshire Wildlife Trust member of staff, then that will be with them. But if it's with someone like Kerry for the fungi or Josh for the small mammal trapping, I'm not sure exactly where this falls. So I'll just need to have a think about it and see kind of what we do, because we've all had to do like just basic safeguarding training, but it's just kind of something that we need to have a bit of a think about. So yeah, so the event's delivered, theoretically everything goes well, everyone's happy, no accidents, etc, etc. We then want to try and get some feedback and some metrics from it. So we've just said about the attendance record. I have a vast spreadsheet now of attendance for every single webinar and in-person event that we've done. And with that, we also record the hours that people have done. The volunteer hours then gets Wendy, our volunteer coordinator, gets them at the end of each year so that we can calculate how many hours as a trust we are relying on volunteer work. So it is important to keep them. Likewise with the attendance side of things, there is, I guess, a bit of, you know, when some things are sold out or like spaces become available and there's waiting lists and things like that, I would be opening them up to people who reliably attend before I would to people who might not reliably attend things. It's up to you whether you want to do that or not. I just think I've decided that it was the fairest way to go about it. Because, yeah, I mean, I think I've had this conversation with some people, like if someone doesn't turn up, they've sort of taken someone else's space, which isn't really very fair, especially on the in-person ones. So yeah, I think that's probably a good way of doing it. And then surveys, which are absolutely everyone's least favorite thing to do. Debbie was sending one after each webinar. They weren't getting filled in. I then started sending them once a month and they weren't getting filled in. So I don't know what the solution is for it to get feedback. I've now found that just kind of having a chat with you guys and taking notes on qualitative feedback is probably more useful than getting people to constantly do surveys. But if you think that there's a better way of getting it done or getting some feedback from people, then like that would be great. It is really useful to have, both from like a perspective, from my perspective, as to what needs to be changed and like what we could do better, but also for me, for the grant provider, they sort of require a bit of feedback. So yeah, there's definitely better ways of doing it. I guess it sort of depends how much you need and what you decide you want to get out of the feedback. So then once we've got all these records, feedback, hopefully, we could do a bit of analysis on it, look at the expected attendance versus the actual attendance, particularly with the public webinars. There's like a huge dropout rate each time because a lot of people sign up for them, then don't turn up. That's fine, but it's something that we need to monitor. And it can give you a bit of an idea of how popular a topic is. If lots of people have signed up for it, then probably a good one. If less people have signed up for it, probably like less interest. It doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It's just that, you know, people are busy in the evening sometimes, and if it's nice weather, like you might prefer to go to the pub and catch up on it on YouTube. We don't currently monitor how many views all of the videos have on YouTube, but it might be something that's worth having a little look at to see how many they get. We'd look at the feedback, obviously, whatever form we get that in, and we'd update the budget with the difference between the budget and the actual costs. Like for the training and events and things like that, the budget and the actual costs should be roughly the same because you will have put into the budget what the quoted cost is to you. But things happen, like sometimes something unexpected happens and they're a bit different, but that's absolutely fine. So just making sure you're keeping the budget up to date. And then from all of this, decide whether you want to put any changes in. So one of the things that has been brought up in feedback is the timing of the webinars. We've been doing them from 6 till 8. Some people have suggested they prefer them from 7 till 9. You know, you guys can decide whether you think that that's a worthwhile change to put in. You could do something sensible like when you have in-person events, start them at the same time each time rather than confusing yourself and doing one at 10 and then one at 10:30 and then one at 11 and then one at 9:30. Bit more sensible. I know this, I haven't done it, but like it's it's like bits like that you can just sort of like take on. I've got loads of really great feedback from the last survey that went out, the one in October, which I'm going to anonymize at some point and will be there for you guys to have a look at it when we get the youth committee going, because I think there's some really useful stuff in there about like what people have enjoyed and what people think might be a little bit better. So that would be great. And then we get to the reporting. So this is looking at how we communicate the achievements on the outcomes of the project. So I do this to the grant provider every 6 months. A report gets sent off to National Lottery Heritage Fund about what we've been doing and how we are or aren't achieving some of the outcomes. So I use a mixture of qualitative and quantitative data. The quantitative data can be nice, like, because it sounds really impressive that we've organised 50 webinars and 15 in-person events when the initial target was to organise 20, I think. So, you know, you can be like, well, we've well overachieved on that side of things. Whereas some of the more kind of the feedbacky stuff, where I think it was the 5 ways to well-being that were on some of the initial surveys, like that data just hasn't been used, and it wasn't sort of really all that relevant. So yeah, it's making sure that you use the data that I kind of guess best speaks to it. The qualitative data can be really nice, like including a little snippets of what people have said and some visuals. Pictures really look good, these kind of things. And I very much imagine that as part of the committee that you guys would need to be producing either quarterly or 6 monthly, sort of like, I wouldn't say reports because it sounds too formal, but I guess updates to the senior management team, just to like check in on how the project is going. I assume that you'll probably speak to them a lot more regularly than that, but it's nice to have something official to just partly for you guys to be like, yeah, we've achieved all of this, but partly so that they know that the project's all going well. And with part of the reports, you can then say, well, this wasn't working quite that well, so we've done this change, or like we had this bit of feedback, but actually we feel that it works best like that. Because you will get feedback sometimes and someone won't understand the reason why you're doing it the way that you are. So you don't have to listen to every single bit of feedback and be like, oh, I'll take that on board, because essentially they might be wrong. But yeah, the reporting's quite a good way of you guys kind of knowing how far that you've got and looking at everything that's been achieved so far. And I think that's basically it. Obviously the big difference is that like the Wilder Future project is technically a 2-year project. So whereas the youth committee is hopefully going to be a permanent fixture within Warwickshire Wildlife Trust. So it's not really a project, I guess, in the same way, but it does need to be managed a little bit like it is one because of the changing of personnel in it. And I think it's just quite an easy way to do things. There's a lot of kind of documentation that goes with a lot of it, like I said, about that. I've got a big spreadsheet of every webinar that we've had so far, who did it, what date it was, how many people attended, and all of that, which you will be able to get access to so that you can keep adding to it. So it should become like quite a meaty amount of information, meaty document that you've got. But essentially, this sort of is more of, I guess, cyclical project. If you look at it sort of every year, this will be what's happening, because when the personnel changes, someone from the current youth committee will need to kind of, I don't guess, like induct the new people. So that would be kind of the plan. Going to have a bit of a chat. I'm just going to kind of roll through this, and any questions about project stuff can come at the end, I think. So we defined 4 objectives that we think the youth committee should deliver. These aren't set in stone yet, and I think I have mentioned them before, but the first one, and the most obvious one that we've all spoken about, is that we want it to continue the work of the Wilder Future for Warwickshire project. That doesn't necessarily mean that it has all of the same outcomes and objectives as the Wilder Future for Warwickshire project, because like I've said, like some of them are quite tricky to manage or to verify. And there's also one of the objectives was like to transfer knowledge from our long-standing volunteers to you guys, which has sort of just been pushed under the carpet a little bit. But the main bit of it is that we want these webinars and these training events to continue on. And that when it refers to continue the work of the Wilder Future project, that's really what we're meaning, that there is regular opportunities at Warwickshire Wildlife Trust that are specifically for a group of young people. So that's what the main objective would be, particularly at the start, because as we've said, like Debbie and I will not be contracted from me from March, Debbie from May. So it would be the committee that starts doing this organisation. The second objective is to give young people their own space at Warwickshire Wildlife Trust. And I think we do that within the project at the moment anyway. Like we have a Facebook group, a WhatsApp group, obviously we have socials, and then we have the in-person events. I think it can be made better still. I think it can be made more inclusive still. And I think that more can be made of it, whether that's sharing more opportunities within the trust, within other trusts, within the ecology sector as a whole. And it can go further and have different volunteer groups. So at the moment, obviously we only go and do the training sessions, but once the youth committee is set up, there's nothing to stop someone being like, I'm going to organise a walk at Snitterfield Bushes today and we're going to go and count butterflies. Like, you don't have to have someone from Warwickshire Wildlife Trust be there all the time. Obviously you do if you're using like a chainsaw or something like that, but like to go and do some of the surveying and the mindfulness and the well-being and things like that, like that can be a separate thing. It doesn't need to be done as an official training event. They can just be done as volunteering. So I think that's the second objective. The third one is to assist Warwickshire Wildlife Trust with other projects. I think this is poorly worded, actually. I'm probably going to reword it. It's so anyone that attended the social will have heard what particularly Ian and Amanda do in their departments. And Ian's department particularly is huge and has got so many different projects going on. And it's difficult always to know, even as an employee, what is going on in other people's departments and where people are. And so what we're hoping to do is have some kind of portal, like whether that's like an intranet or Slack channels or Teams or something like that, where people can, from the trust, share a bit more of assistance that they need with the project. And this could be, some of it could be like data entry, some of it could be research, some of it could be going out and doing a survey of this, going through the photos on a camera trap. Like, it could just be literally all sorts of things, but it will all be centralized through one thing. And it might be that like staff in the trust use it as well and say like, oh, I've got a bit of free time, I can help out with that. Or, oh, I'm like you could be like, oh, I'm good at GIS, I could help out with this bit. But that's the general plan. And it's so that like so I keep mentioning this, before Christmas, the trust did like 3 sort of business workshops, like with all of us employees, where we went through the new strategy and all of that sort of stuff. And one thing that we identified is that our internal communications isn't good enough at the moment as it stands. So how other people are expected to know the wider things that are going on in the trust when people inside the trust don't know is an issue. But I see that this being not just for you guys as volunteers, but for all of the volunteers a bit more, because we want you guys to have your own space, but the volunteer communications in a wider sense also need to be improved. And I think this would sit with this. It has to be said that I think this is what I've just described, the job portal, volunteer portal, intranet, is an ambitious target, given some of the technophobes that are at the trust. But I don't think it's impossible. And then the 4th objective is to ensure that young people's voices and opinions are represented in the trust strategy. And we've put this in 4th because I think getting the youth committee operationally functional is the most important things, getting the Wilder Future project continued, and then getting your own space, and then assisting with the other projects, because that will give you a really good overall knowledge of exactly how the trust works and what the trust is doing, so that then in the final stage of it, you could feel comfortable to put your opinions into the strategy. I don't know if anyone's had a chance to read the strategy that I sent out back in November, after the social, as per Ed's request, but I can resend it so that you can have a little look over it. I think we as a team generally feel that it's quite a good strategy, that it's ambitious, but that it's achievable. And I think that with this 4th objective, there's definitely still some discussion about how this works, whether someone from the youth committee sits on the board of trustees or with the trustees when they meet, or whether one of the trustees sits with the youth committee when they meet, or vice versa, or it all goes through senior management team. I think that'll be a bit of sort of like finding our way once it's set up. I mean, obviously some of you guys have met the trustees, and they're all like incredibly enthusiastic, and from speaking to them at that social, they're all really interested in the project and they want to be engaged with it, which is great. But as they are also, most of them, of a different age to the rest of us, so it would definitely be good to get some like young people into it in the end. I think it will just kind of take a little bit of time. So that's what we're hoping to achieve. In terms of how we're going to achieve it, operationally, this at the moment is the plan. Once I've finished talking, we can have a bit of a discussion on it, because I'm not saying that what I'm suggesting here is the right thing. But I am visioning it as probably a committee of about 7 or 8 people. Some of the people will have a defined role, others of them will just be committee members. When I say a defined role, I think that we're talking about a chairperson, a treasurer, potentially a sort of social chair, social secretary, and potentially someone that was looking a bit more at like the campaigns and social media side of things. And then committee members, 3 or 4 committee members as well. But this is just like how I've envisioned it. My reason for suggesting having some defined roles is that occasionally too many cooks in the kitchen can be a bit of an issue. And if someone has a bit more authority on certain things, it can help with the decision-making process. It might be that like over the course of the year, you cycle around all the roles and say that different people are a chairperson for different amounts of time. Fine, that would work. But because there are so many, I guess, little bitty elements to this, you don't want 8 people working on one budget. You want one person being in control of that budget. Everyone can have input into it, but someone needs to take ownership of certain bits of this. So I think that's why having some defined roles would be a really useful way of doing it. Having said that, I've never sat on a committee in my life, so like I'm happy to be like disagreed with on this. In terms of commitment, we're thinking a year. So anyone that applies for a role on the committee would need to intend at least to be living in Warwickshire for the next year. Obviously things happen and people move, but like not to be like, oh yeah, I'm definitely moving in 6 months and not tell them about it, because we need a bit of continuity with it. And then in terms of the amount of time, I think that about 10 hours a month is probably what we'd be asking for. But this doesn't include time that you would spend on a webinar or like at an event. That would be like time that the committee is, that you're doing your tasks for the committee or attending a meeting. So yeah, like I reckon two hours a week, give or take. Might be less, might be more. I think we'll just have to like feel it out a little bit by kind of how it all goes. And it's probably one of those things that some months you won't really have anything to do, whereas other months might be a bit busier. But and based on sort of feedback from people in the survey, that seems to be a amount of time that would be reasonable for people to be able to commit. I think we're going to have an application for it, full application form, just to kind of gauge people's interests and to make sure that we've got people that have got, at least kind of for the first one, that are committed to the project, that have shown their commitment to the project, and that have a bit of a diverse skill set. You guys have all got different strengths, and we want this to be as diverse as possible, and we want everyone to be able to play to their strengths on it. So I think after this discussion, Debbie gets back on the 17th of January. Yeah, 17th of January. As soon as she's back and like I've agreed it with her, we'll probably be opening up the applications. So about 10 days or so, theoretically. And then in terms of the management of how the committee works, this one is still a little bit up in the air. I was hoping to have a chat with Carl about it today, but he's still on annual leave. We, as a trust, theoretically, once Debbie and I go, won't have a singular person that is full-time role is looking at youth engagement, but that doesn't mean that it won't become part of someone else's role. And I think that there will be one main point of contact at the trust for this project. And how all of this is done is still, again, up for question. I've chatted to a couple of other trusts that have got youth councils, and they all manage it on Teams, and everyone has like their chat on there, which seems to be a fairly easy way of doing it. But yeah, the management of this, yeah, it could be changed. I mean, it could change anyway. Like this project is 18 to 35. You guys might want to be like, we should probably include like 17-year-olds or 16-year-olds, and like, you know, anything could change. But the reason that this is that we're doing this more as a committee, that is because you guys are a bit older, because a lot of these youth councils are like 14 to 24, whereas like we'll have people in this that are adults for all intents and purposes, that have jobs, that that will be able to like do this without as much active management essentially from the trust, whereas 14-year-olds most definitely cannot do that. So this is why we've gone for this approach. But it could be changed, and you guys could decide that that's not the approach to go for, and that you want to include younger people. So who knows? I have waffled on for a while. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I've got that feedback thing, and so I figured that we could just have a chat now, and if anyone has any ideas or feedback or questions, then hit me up.
I had like a couple of really boring questions from some of the stuff around delivery. In terms of like people, so if we're obviously at the youth council, we're all registered as volunteers through the trust. With the people who sign up to webinars or to do anything like that, would they have to fill in like the volunteer forms that Wendy sends out and do all of that?
Webinars, no, definitely not. That's fine. So the events could be done slightly differently. It sort of depends how the committee wants to work. So I don't require you guys to fill in a full spiel every time we do the events, because I've already got all of your details, because you are registered volunteers. It depends whether you want people to carry on. If we want to have these like young adult ambassadors and want people to carry on signing up as volunteers and have it as a like community like that, or you're going to say that these events are open to the public, in which case you wouldn't need them to sign up as a volunteer, but you would need to take a lot more details from them than what I take from you.
Okay. And then, so following on from that, GDPR, when we take the contact details, is that all just covered by like the trust's policy? But I'm guessing we need to know how the trust deals with GDPR. Yeah,
we have a very long GDPR policy.
Yeah.
So I get around it by not printing anything out, basically. So I like have whenever I have your contact details and we go to an event, I've just got them on my phone, and then I've got a photograph of it, and then I delete it afterwards, so that I don't have to worry about that kind of side of things. If they weren't volunteers, I'm not sure. I'll have to find out.
Yeah, because I was wondering about things like the WhatsApp groups and Facebook groups and stuff like that. I think Facebook is okay because it's people like sign up with their own profile, and then you're covered under the data stuff that's on Facebook. But I think things like WhatsApp groups, and it's like people's personal numbers and stuff like that. So I think it's more grey.
Yeah, because that's why I insisted that I wasn't having anything to do with the WhatsApp group, and that it's from, even though I am on it now, but it's my personal number that's on it rather than my work number, so it's fine. But I think the WhatsApp group would probably need to stay between sort of registered,
basically.
Yeah, or just have it as an ad hoc social thing rather than doing anything officially organising through it, I guess.
And then the only other question I had, so in terms of like access to documents and stuff like that, so you said that there's risk assessments for like every site.
Mm-hmm.
How would like the chair, would like the designated people on the committee have like email addresses or anything like that so they can access, or like how would they access that documents and stuff like that?
So I don't think they'll have email addresses. I did think about this because I think it would get too complicated with the like changeover of everything. But what they might have is one email address that
okay.
We could, because we're on Outlook. So like the chair would have like
Outlook.com type thing.
Yes. Yeah. But I'd need to have a chat with Carl to figure out how to document share some of it. Because they're not like, the risk assessments aren't confidential. Anyone can request to see a risk assessment of a site. I don't know why they would, but they could. So yeah, I'd need to have to think about that actually. That's a good point.
Okay. I think that was it. I'm sorry, all really boring questions, but oh no, I had one more question. Sorry. Is there any scope to stagger the changeover of the committee positions, or would everybody change at the same time? And I was just thinking in terms of like the handover and having somebody actually coordinate the handover.
What, so that people did, do you think maybe just in like the first year stagger it a little bit so that there's a slightly different tenure for people, because then it would be naturally staggered?
Yeah, almost like even just sort of like, I don't know, if you had, if there were 4 designated positions, even if 2 of them change and then like 2 months later the other 2 change, or so, or like a quarter, like 3 months later, a quarter later, or something like that, just to sort of make sure that you've got 2 people who have kind of had that chance to have everything handed over, so that when you get the next 2 people coming in, there's sort of like not everybody's like brand new all in one go. I mean, even purely for just things like access to files and documents and stuff, of having somebody who like knows where to go and has had 3 months to familiarize themselves with where stuff is before then the next people kind of come in. Because I'm just thinking, I did like a couple of committees when I was at uni, and it was a nightmare when you'd have, everyone would come back in September and then be like the start of their committee year. And if you didn't have anybody from the previous year, like often people would change position. So that was great, because you had people who had been in a different position the year before, knew who to talk to for that, who to get this from, like where you'd actually go for that. So it didn't matter like how good a handover you actually tried to do, you'd never get everything in one go.
Okay, so we could maybe look at staggering it particularly more in the first year, so that some people, maybe bringing some people on earlier, or like new committee members on earlier, and then keeping some people on later. Or we could also look at maybe not that you could do another year if you wanted to, but you'd have to apply and move. Like, I think you'd have to apply each year and like move position, but that would give people the opportunity if they wanted to stay on longer, and that would obviously help with handover. Okay, yeah, that's a good point.
Would there then be like a maximum term, like they could only do like 2 years or something, I think, really, because otherwise you get people just staying on the committee forever until they're 35 and then they can't. But if they start when they're 18, that's a long time.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, that's very good. Anybody else? Questions, comments?
It's not a question, it's more of a suggestion, but there's a website called the Young Trustees Movement, and I think they have like resources and training videos that you can, events that you can sign up for. I think it's called the Champion Training, and that might be quite helpful for, you know, how you said the 4th objective was to like get young people's opinions, and like you're going to figure out how they sort of liaise with the trustees and the council and everything. So that might just be helpful, figuring out how best to do that.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I think Chelsea went to one of their things, didn't you? Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one, Abby. They might even come in and do, it might be worth like, once the committee is set up, like properly scheduling some training for them in that sort of thing, like getting an external provider in to do a bit of strategy training or something like that, or like
Yeah, I think they'd do that. I think they'd be up for that.
This is a bit of a more rogue idea, but do you think there's any merit in trying to connect with like other groups that are maybe not necessarily like wildlife focused in Warwickshire, but outdoors type focused, particularly focused on sort of like inclusivity, like diversity of young people? I'm kind of thinking of groups like I think like Flock Together did a bird watching session in Coventry, and whether like there's a sort of natural partnership for like a Flock Together and Warwickshire Wildlife Trust Youth Committee event, or even potentially people like the Muslim hikers group that's quite big now, but the guy who runs that is based in Coventry. So like I don't know whether there's almost crossover events type things that might work. Yeah, to try and like increase reach to maybe different audiences.
Well, I think one thing that, because I mean, initially, realistically, the first members of the youth committee are going to be you guys. Like, that's, but I think it would be nice to keep, I mean, we've talked about the name Young Adult Ambassadors maybe isn't the best name for what we define this as, but keeping it as a community rather than having like public events, I think would be really nice. And so when Debbie first started this, there was a big recruitment drive to get young ambassadors signed up. And there was that event at Warwick Uni, and I think she did some other things as well. But since I've taken it over, like as per the project plan, the recruitment phase has stopped. So anyone that's joined has just kind of found us organically. But definitely when the youth committee starts, I think there needs to be another recruitment phase to get more people involved, and working with other groups, Flock Together or Muslim hikers, or that, and like you said, any sort of outdoorsy or young persons based group in Warwickshire would be a really good way to do that. So yeah, definitely. But I think that, and this will probably come out as part of the planning, a recruitment drive is definitely necessary again.
Do we have like, does people at the trust have contacts for like the local unis and stuff like that, like who the go-to people are to speak to?
Yes, but it's not centralized anywhere. It's just
Okay.
in people's emails. So
Okay.
I was just going to ask Joe, like, when do you think that the committee would start? Like, obviously you'll be looking at applications this month, but like, when would the year sort of go from? Because I am sort of thinking about traveling, but yeah, I just want to figure out timings.
I can't say, I don't think.
Okay.
I mean, it's a bit difficult because technically the active delivery phase of this project finishes at the end of February when I leave. That's why they kept me on for an extra 2 months to complete it. But realistically, I already have stuff booked in March and April for you. So it's still going to be being delivered at that point. I imagine that it would probably be, I think, sort of February, March time, hopefully.
Okay. Cool.
But it's so difficult to know sometimes with so much bureaucracy in the child.
Yeah.
But to be fair, I should have a better answer by the end of the week once I've spoken to Carl. So
Okay, cool, no problem. Yeah, that sounds good. I was just wondering whether it was going to be like late summer or anything like that, so that's fine. Cool.
No, it will need to be definitely, like, I mean, Debbie finishes in May, so I think it needs to be up and running by April.
Yeah.
Does the trust work to financial years? Because or not? Because like obviously for me, everything I'm doing in terms of my projects at the moment, if it doesn't happen before the end of March, it's like a new budget and everything. Okay.
No, I got given a new budget. I was told that I need to get loads of stuff in December, so I don't know if I'm gonna do it by year end, but yeah. But I think April would be my aim for when it needs to be functional.
Cool, sounds good. I was also thinking, when you were talking about first aid and stuff, I think it'd be really good if there could be like a group first aid course and stuff like that, just because I know a couple of people are first aid trained, but it's quite hard to actually get trained as if you're not part of like a company or a group. So I think that would be a really good thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. They do regular first aid training at the trust, like every month or so. So I think that would be doable, definitely.
Yeah, brilliant.
Does anyone have any feedback on the objectives, or think that there's something else that we need to be including in it, or making any of them? Like, you can come back to me on this one, I guess. I think that it's just I think we really need to nail the objectives down, and then how we do it can sort of be discussed still as we go, and like we can make these plans, but the general what we do, I think needs to be right now, like right as soon as possible, if that makes sense. So,
yeah, my experience of doing objectives and everything is obviously incredibly corporate-y, and I'm happy for people to just say, I don't want to do this at all. But is it worth like going through and doing like more of a vision thing with the objectives, like having the objectives, but then also having like, I hate the fact this is even coming out of my mouth, but like pillars, because we always used to do things like education pillars, engagement pillar, and something else, I can't remember what it was, but like basically like the 3 targets of how we were sort of engaging, and I think like well-being is normally one as well, and maybe kind of just to try and kind of break up the events, like some might be more like focused on the mindfulness and the well-being, some might be focused on education, others might be focused on like engagement and sort of volunteering and campaigning, but I don't know whether it's worth sort of doing anything like that or not. I'm perfectly happy for it to be the answer to be not, because I do that a lot of work.
Yeah, I kind of like continuing that kind of thought. I think that my only concern with these objectives is, other than the last one, they're kind of all relevant to other external things. So it's like continuing the Wilder Future for Warwickshire project, but I don't know, you kind of need that external context for that to make sense.
mm-hmm.
And I think that might be more, I don't know, easier to kind of implement and to think about if it was more kind of concrete on its own. So like what exactly is the point of this committee? Is it to educate people? Is it to encourage people to have an interest? Like, what are the main kind of, why does it exist, is kind of what I'm not so sure about from this. Like, I think that giving young people their space at the Wildlife Trust is really, really important and shouldn't disappear, but it's kind of supplementary rather than it being like, why does it exist?
Okay.
I don't think that makes any sense.
No, that does make sense. Yeah, I think, I guess for me, because I know the context of what the objectives of the Wilder Future project are, I know what I mean by that, but I appreciate that other people don't. So yeah, that's a very good point. Okay, so Colin, what do you want it to achieve? What would someone want it to achieve? Is it that we are just simply somewhere to provide training for young people who are interested in conservation, or are we creating a social space for young people to meet, or are we trying to inspire change? Like, what would you guys think the objectives should be?
I agree with all of those. I think the connection bit was probably one of the things that I think back on the last year, the connection with like other like-minded people has probably been like the standout thing. The training has been fantastic, but it's through the training that I've got the connection.
Okay, so I think we do all know what we want it to be. We want it to be all of those things, but I don't think it's phrased right then in those objectives, because I think there's implied knowledge for some of them, with I think the exception of that last one. Okay, I think that's a really good point, Aisling. Thank you. I will go away and try and rephrase them. In terms then of these objectives, if anyone does want to send me a quick email with, doesn't need to make sense, just bullet points of words or something that they think should be included in them, then that would be really useful. And then maybe we can break it down a little bit and have these as objectives, and then on the next one look at how we're going to do that, and whether that is through training events, social events, creating job boards, things like that. We'll separate these two things out a little bit more. I think that would help. Okay, good, thank you. Anyone else?
I have a question. I mean, hopefully, obviously, we hope that this doesn't happen, because there's 8 of us here tonight, so that'll give us the sort of 7 or 8 people of the committee. So I'm guessing that everyone's here because they do want to be involved in some way. But what would happen if we didn't have everyone here basically agreeing to be part of the committee and applying to be part of the committee? Like, say even just someone's circumstances change, which would be completely understandable. Would it then be a matter of trying to function with less people and just kind of hoping that it works, and that we can, if we can figure out the roles shared between everyone, say between 5 of us, we'll just make a crack at it and go anyway? Or would it be a case of at some point we would have to consider, okay, there's only 4 of us, this isn't going to actually work in this manner? Like, basically, if we don't have enough people, what would we proceed with?
Good point. So I think on the last survey I had 19 people say that they might be interested in joining the committee, and I've had a couple of apologies from people tonight who've asked me to send them the recording. I think that internally Warwickshire Wildlife Trust needs to do some crisis planning around that and decide what the course of action would be if that were to happen, whether that means staff coming in and helping out, or if it means disbanding, which would be really sad, obviously. I think that this also comes down to the recruitment that I mentioned. I think that because this was a 2-year project, they stopped the recruit, like on the project plan, the recruitment side of it stopped, because in the sense that there's very little point in someone joining this right now, because technically it's finishing in 2 months' time. Whereas with the youth committee, because technically it will go on forever, the recruitment phase should also be continually happening. So I think that would be good in terms of getting more people in and drumming up more interest with it. And when Debbie was doing it at the beginning, it was something that was like not hugely time consuming, but it did mean going to like universities and having like stalls at places and things like that. So like it's not an insignificant bit of that, but yeah, we need to come up with some kind of plan as to what we'd do. Personally, like some of the committees or the councils that other trusts have set up have got like 12 people on them, and I just think that's too many. But we could look at being like, well, let's pad it out and get 12 people, with the assumption that 2 people might drop out and 2 people might be a bit rubbish, so that you're down to 8, which is what we're aiming for. So that's definitely a way of doing it, is to over recruit on the committee, so that you're not left in a situation where you've got 4 of you. I guess I guess it's going to have to be said that the first year of this is probably going to be a bit guinea pig-esque, as we kind of work our way through it and decide what works and what doesn't, both from like the trust and from whoever's in the committee. But that's also why I think that for this first year, that would really only open up applications to you guys, because you already have that base knowledge of how it's been done already, and the project, and us as a trust. So yeah, I'd say that's, and then we'd know that hopefully the people would be committed as well, because we all know each other. I think probably like there's more likely to be a lack of commitment when people don't feel responsibility to each other. So in some senses, the more community you can foster, the less likely people are to, I mean, obviously, like I said, people might move away, that happens, but less likely to drop out just for like disinterest. That makes sense.
In terms of the application process, is the plan to have like open applications for all roles, or is it going to be sort of you apply for a specific role, and therefore is there going to be like a breakdown of what the key responsibilities of that person's role would be?
So I'm going to open it just as a general application, because I'm happy to take a lot of feedback on like those roles and what you think there should be. I think during the application process, it will say, we envisage X roles. Are you particularly interested in any of them? But the deciding on, I think it'll be like anyone who applies, honestly, anyone who applies to the youth committee, I imagine will be on it. It will then be a discussion as to how we put those roles out and who's interested in them, because you don't want to force someone who doesn't want to do one into one of them. And like, you know, there's some people that really probably might want to get some experience of budgeting, but maybe for the first quarter it would be better to have someone who already has experience in budgeting. So I think just for this one it will be like that. But then once we know the roles work, then if it comes to like reapplications or like opening up applications for the next time, then we can have a bit more detail on them. Did anyone like in about those roles, does everyone feel that like having some sort of defined or a couple of defined roles make sense?
100%, yeah. I would potentially add a secretary role, which is just because I think it's a lot of work actually sometimes.
Yeah.
But yeah, the best committees I've been on have been where there was some really clear roles and responsibilities. I think it makes sense as well.
I was going to ask if there's any scope, or just for this first year where it's kind of all still being organized, if there's any scope for people to kind of register interest for like helping out with odds and ends. I know I can't commit to a full year. I think Elle was saying had a similar concern, but I'm still really interested in like, I don't know if there's like recruitment events that need someone to go and help out or things like that. I'd still like to be involved while I can, but I don't know if that's at all realistic. And I understand that might just be a huge like admin faff that's not worth it.
Well, no, I think it is. I think it's definitely something that we should be doing, but I think it requires this creation of this like volunteer space or like intranet or whatever it is, so that these opportunities are like broadcast to anyone who is registered as a volunteer at Warwickshire Wildlife Trust. But as just for the committee, I don't know. I mean, it could be a case of posting stuff on the Facebook page or something like that, or including it in weekly emails and saying, hey, we need someone to do this on this date. And I definitely can't see why non-committee members wouldn't be able to go and help out with that sort of stuff. But if we're saying that, then we are definitely saying that we want people to be registered as volunteers. And that I do think that in terms of like the in-person events, I don't think you want to be opening those up to the general public. I think they do want to be people that are, I mean, if we want to change the name from Young Adult Ambassador, then I don't know what we'd want to call it if it wasn't ambassadors. I don't know, just young adult volunteers or something, whatever it is. But yeah, I can't see why you can't help out with that, with kind of that side of things. And it might be that, you know, depending on what you want your role in the committee to be, like, or what you say that you're bringing to the table, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be in Warwickshire for the entire year. Because I mean, I know you're a student, so, but if you're saying that like, oh, what I'd really like to do is get involved with some of the more like, I don't know, like the social media or like marketing or campaigning, a lot of that's done virtually anyway. So it's more like that side of things. Whereas if you're saying, well, I want to practically be there and organise the events, then can't do that as much.
So would you say it's still worth applying and then see how it goes if you can't meet the like be here for a year requirement?
Yeah, just to be, as I would say, as long as you're upfront about where you're going to be, if you know that you're going away, say that you're going away, like then just, yeah, like if you're going to be away for 9 out of the 12 months, then no, it's probably not going to work. But you know, it will, might as well see.
Okay. I think like sort of in future years as well, because obviously we might want to attract students doing ecology-based degrees and stuff like that, where there's always going to be that term time element of things. It might be that we just ask for sort of 12 months of commitment, but if you're not going to be able to be there in person, like detail the 3 months when you're going to be remote kind of thing. But yeah, and I guess once you've got a committee set up, the other thing is if you had like, you can always sort of do Google surveys, because I think when we joined up, we sort of said like how many hours we thought we could commit a week and all that kind of stuff.
I mean, and it also has to be said that like when Debbie and I have been doing this, or like when I've been doing this, like it means that because I'm just one person, I have to be pretty much at every webinar and every in-person event. When there's a committee of 10 people, it doesn't mean that you have to be at every single event because there's 10 of you. So it does give you that a load more flexibility to be able to work or go to the things that are convenient for you, or like work around it in your own time a lot more, rather than like, I mean, because I've been upfront with Carl about this and been like, it's a lot to ask of one person to take, like, not that I don't love the webinars, but there's some Tuesday nights where I really don't want to do them. So but like you'll then have that option, so that, I think that would be fine. Anything else? I mean, feel free to kind of drop me emails or anything with any thoughts that you have afterwards. I can send you over, I think particularly about those objectives, if you can jot down some ideas, but I think like what we spoke about earlier was really valuable, and I'll definitely look into rephrasing them. Once I've got some feedback for you and I have rephrased them, I'll send them back to you guys and just like get your input again, and then we'll hopefully open up applications within the next couple of weeks. I mean, the project management side of it, like I said, it is quite straightforward. Like it's really just organize stuff. And once the committee's set up, like there will be like a handover so that you can see how specifically some of these things are organized, whether it's like the Eventbrite stuff, whether it's logging into the website to put on something else, but none of it is like outside, like is particularly difficult to pick up. I do think that there just definitely needs to be a conversation about how many things you want to put on, how regularly to put them on, and what you want to put on. I think are, like, in terms of the project management side of it, the biggest things that you need to consider, because it is harder than you think sometimes to find people to do these things. Oh yeah, one thing that I did touch upon was that obviously the Wilder Future project has been looking at both the ecology side of things and the campaigns, communication, social media, etc. side. And I've been upfront with the grant providers and with my managers and said that side of it honestly hasn't gone down that well. It hasn't been as well attended than the ecology side of things, and the feedback from some people is that that's just not really what they're interested in. So I think something that does need to be discussed by the committee fairly early on is whether that stays as part of what you want to be doing. Like, my 2 cents for it would be, yeah, keep it in, but less, like, because it's supposed to be sort of a 50-50 split, and it hasn't been that. I've put on more ecology things than campaigning things, but maybe even reduce it to like 25% that and 75% ecology.
I think it is also worth noting that, at least when I was like recruited for it, it was very much about the ecology side. So I think there probably aren't as many people who joined looking for the like campaigning side.
Yeah.
So it might be worth considering like how the project's advertised, as well as like how you give the content to people who are already here, as well as who you get to do the content you want to do. I think that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean, and I agree. I think it was advertised as far more sort of ecology based.
I think the nature of the timings as well, and the fact that it was quite like very much like a big block then of the campaigning stuff as well, meant there's a little bit of overlap between some of the sessions as well, which I think was kind of difficult. But I think that I personally agree. I think it's really important to keep it, because I think there's so little else that in terms of other resources for people to go to get that kind of information. But yeah, to kind of do less of it, or have it as being like an optional stream that people can just engage with it if that's what they really, really want to do. I also do think it's really important because for people who might be interested in some of the committee positions, because I think some of those sort of skills around like some of the social media stuff and like the project planning and all that kind of stuff actually really maybe like lend themselves to the committee positions.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I'll be able to pass on all the contacts, I think that some of them were really good. I think that social media one that we did was excellent. That was really useful. I think that the directory for social change did the back-to-back one in September on the campaigning and lobbying, which again was really, really good. So yeah, I think they've just maybe been a bit more of a mixed bag when it comes to some of them. But yeah, I would say keep it in, but like less of them maybe, because it was supposed to be, year 1 of this project was supposed to be solely ecology, and then year 2 was supposed to be solely campaigning. I didn't do that, so it's fine. Cool. Has anyone got anything else to add? No. Okay. Equally, if anyone has an idea for a webinar, I just have, how many spaces I'm missing? Let me get my calendar up. One week in February. I just need one more. So any ideas? Some bad ideas. I welcome ideas. Cool. Right. Thanks everyone. I hope it's been somewhat informative for you. And yeah, we haven't got any in-person events scheduled in at the moment because I had no idea what was going to happen with COVID. So I'll try and get something put in. I'm trying to get like a scat and tracks one so that we can get some owl pellets, which I used to love doing as a kid, and make some like plasticasts of some animal tracks because it's fun. So yeah, that's what I'm trying to get sorted for the next some point in the next couple of weeks, and then we'll be trying to put in our social again probably for February. If that works. Right, have a nice evening, guys. See you all soon.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.